Traditional Chinese opera or siqu originated from the 12th century during the Song dynasty. While it still bears a lot of cultural and entertainment values to the Chinese people all over the world, its popularity held a precedence in the hearts of the people in the past and generally remained with sentimental value for the dead. In Singapore and many parts of East Asia, Chinese opera performance is still closely associated to the grand ceremonial praying to the deities on special dates, as well as a form of entertainment to appease the dead during the Hungry Ghost Month. Over the years, there were horror movies that set their stage literally on the Chinese opera, and in this installment of Asian Trips, KK will introduce 3 Hong Kong movies that infuse the Chinese opera element into their plot. We begin with Hocus Pocus, or known as Yan Hak Guai, from 1984. Produced by Sammo Hung and directed by Chin Yak San. The title of the movie adopted the same naming convention with Hung's many jiangshi movies of the 1980s, as reviewed previously on this channel. Hocus Pocus was not a jiangshi movie, but it did boast the late Lam Chi-ying as Uncle Shen, an elderly statesman in an opera troupe who was in the usual non-nonsense demeanor, trying to keep orders and rules within the troupe and uphold the integrity of their trade. The first half of the movie saw our young protagonist Guai, who is agile both physically and mentally, always engulfed in banters with his fellow young troupe members, and a long-standing antagonism with the main lead of the troupe, Ka, who was a womanizing egomaniac and had no appreciation to his fellow colleagues. Through their shenanigans in a new town, they will be crossing paths with a resident ghost, more affectionately known as Teochew Ghost. With his bones remains being buried under the performance theatre, he was tied to the place and had been bullied in the afterlife. After a blatant possession of Ka by Teochew Ghost in front of the rest of the troupe, Sheng would have to get rid of the haunting only the Chinese opera expertise could cook up. Just when the troupe thought that the storm had passed, they were caught unaware of the real threat that was more malevolent and ruthless than a mischievous bulbous head entity. Written by Koi Peng Nam, I thought the story of Hocus Pocus was brilliantly written to convey the trials and tribulations of a Chinese opera troupe in the ancient times, with the hierarchy of the troupe members well mapped out. The 3-act structure was clearly defined, and the characters were simple and all had a redeeming arcs. The likes of Lam Chi-ying and director Chin Yak San were trained since childhood in the same opera troupe. Therefore, there was some authenticity in their performances. The 2 key scenes about dealing with the ghosts by Lam's Uncle Sheng leading his charges, assuming their roles as deities, especially with the part with Zhong Kui, the vanquisher of ghosts, with Guai and his troupe members assuming the colourful Wu Gui. The concept of deceiving the ghosts to believe the actors were real deities to inflict fear and apprehension in order to nullify the threat of the malevolent entities were a known knowledge that even people these days will follow, and in both scenes, the unfortunate revelation brought problems to Uncle Sheng, and in the latter case, their lives were at stake. As compared to other Sammo Hung's memorable kung fu horror comedy features, the scares and levity certainly was hard to replicate. The first prank session from Guai and his friends on the unsuspecting Ka felt like something we had seen from Encounter of the Spooky Kind, a movie released like a year or 2 prior. The big bad was a malevolent ghost with a makeup as awful as the jiangshi played by Yuan Biao in Encounter, though I remember I had nightmares of this image in my childhood. The scene that affected me for the longest time, that revisiting the scene decades later still get my fear receptor tingling, was when they were preparing for the banquet and the turtle got possessed and went rogue. The kung fu choreography from the Hung clan was decent, nothing to shout about, but still putting the likes of Ka, played by an actor who was never known in the action genre before and since, in decent light. There were several familiar faces from the Hung clan, and the chemistry among the actors were evident to see. In the lead role of Guai was Stephen Tong Wai, who was groomed to be a good-looking action star in the mold of Chin Siu Ho, Jet Li, and later on Donnie Yen. This was perhaps the only movie that featured him prominently, although he had some eye-catching performances in TV serials in years to follow. His character was easy to root for with his wits and physical dexterity. However, there was one scene in which when he felt betrayed by Teochew Ghost after the efforts the troupe had made to help the ghost from his doldrums, only for the ungrateful ghosts to return and harm them. The editor of the movie went for a slow motion to accentuate Wai's emotions. The end result felt corny and killed Tong Wai's theoretical acting career before it actually began. The emergence of Chin Siu-ho in Mr. Vampire, released a year after Hocus Pocus, did not help his cause. Tong would go on to be more recognizable as a director and a multiple awards-winning action choreographer. This was still very early in Lam Chi-ying's career in the horror genre, but he still had that aura, although he was not the Mao Shan priest we all grown accustomed to. I certainly enjoyed the prologue Shen had shared with the young people in the troupe of the eerie encounter he had in his youth, performing for a non-living audience. Hocus Pocus did not went down in history as one of the more memorable Sammo Hong's horror comedies that drove the Jiangshi fad in the 1980s, like Encounters and Mr. Vampire. It did left an indelible mark in me with various scenes, and rewatching the movie, I could feel the efforts in the storytelling and delving into the taboos and beliefs of a Chinese opera troupe, which many will still observe years later. Hocus Pocus is an 8 out of 10 for me. For a period of time, the Hong Kong cinematic scene was marked with horror comedies with an ensemble cast, especially with the success of Mr. Vampire. For every haunted cop shop was a bunch of shitty drizzles, including the sequel to Cop Shop itself, and somehow many would feature Sandra Ng, who was totally immersed in her ugly fat girl persona that men would not hesitate to run away from. Mortuary Blues or Si Ka Chong Tai from the year 1990 was another of such forgettable romp starring Sandra Ng, but boasted a decent caliber behind the scene. It was produced by the late Corey Yuen, who would star in it too, and written and directed by Jeffrey Lau, who would go on to make the movie to shape Stephen Chow's acting career in All for the Winner in the same year, similarly starring the hardworking Sandra Ng. The Chinese opera essence came from the fact that Ng's character was part of a travelling opera troupe which arrived to this small offshore island from mainland Hong Kong for a string of performances on the request of the three powerful families on the island. From the prologue, we knew that these families had a secret they are willing to be buried with about their ancestors coming upon a copious amount of treasure, together with a scary corpse claimed to be the cruel Qin Si Huang. Upon consulting religious master on ensuring the feng shui of the island, bringing prosperity and wealth to the families for generations, as well as keeping the unrest of the corpse and the souls of people perished during this bloodshed windfall, the families had to safeguard their properties, and employing the opera troupe was a way to appease the angry souls, something that once again highlighted how connected the Chinese opera was with the supernatural. Corey Yuen's character was the uncouth police inspector of a police station with very limited budget and the skeletal crew of just 2 assistant constables. He harbored a sense of justice and the fateful duties of fighting crime, especially suspecting the wealthy families of accumulating wealth from illicit activities like selling drugs. Some sketchy people got news of the treasure buried in the island, and we saw 2 familiar faces from the 1980s we had introduced in previous reviews in this channel, arriving in an attempt of treasure hunting which ended with tragic deaths. This would link the various characters, each with their ulterior motives, in a madcap romp on the island. With an interesting backstory, Lau's direction with sound comedic nuance, as well as competent action set pieces from the likes of Yuan and many of Sammo Hong's collaborators, it was a bit sad Mortuary Blues was nothing but a string of set pieces that was underwhelming with the talents involved. On the surface, the shoddy police station on an offshore island with the police being mired in some supernatural interference reminded me of Hong's Spook Spook, which also featured Corey Yuen in the cast. Personally, the set pieces and scares were much more memorable for me in Spook Spook, but I suppose the general consensus would be both movies belong to the same tier of an ensembled horror comedy. While there were a lot of gratuitously low-hanging crass jokes being used by Lau with farts and unsolicited sexual assaults aplenty, the director was still nuanced with his comedic timing, with actors like the likes of Ng, Yuan, and Lowell Low playing a scheming home tutor, carrying a lot of the comedic's performances. It felt like Lau and Yuan was trying to fulfill their long-standing infatuation for the Indiana Jones movies with the treasure hunting and subsequent booby trap scenes. I enjoyed the cracking of riddles for clues to find the treasure, which remotely hit the feel of a national treasure. The final showdown with the decomposed corpse of Qin Si Huang made use of the Chinese opera stage and like in the climatic end with Hocus Pocus, an attempt to bamboozle the evil entity was in order to force it into submission. The choreography from Yuan worked a splendor in the movie without much religious intervention in the storyline. The crusty makeup once again was more comical than anything else, which took away from the intimidation factor of the corpse and deflated enjoyability. Then again, looking at the piss-poor makeup of the female zombies who were serving the emperor in earlier scenes, you can determine how shoddy the makeup works in this movie. It was hard to classify the Qin Shi Huang as a jiangshi, as he was behaving like a human being who could move with ease and with mental agility to battle his antagonists, without serious dissecting of the slipshod plot. Mortuary Blues still had its moments to tickle audiences even after 35 years. The Chinese opera aspect worked into the premise, and the revisit of the location in the climatic end gave the opera setting its importance to the story. Mortuary Blues is a 7 out of 10 for some nostalgic fun. By the way, the title was a play of the term Si Ga Chong Tai, which stood for private property, with the replacement word as a play of the character for dead body. Demi-Haunted or Wan Pa Zai from 2002 is the more contemporary of the three movies reviewed today. Directed by Leong Park Ging and written by Chan Man Yao, Demi-Haunted, which took story essence from Stanley Kwan's Rouge, which was one of the most famous stories for both the late Anita Mui and Leslie Cheung, in which the spirit of a deceased opera actress from 50 years ago enlisting the help of a living actor of the same trade to look for the man she loved. I was informed of this movie starring Eason Chan, which claimed to be a scary filmed shooting experience for the singer, and considering his previous supernatural flick, Visible Secret, was well known for their experience in haunting on the film production set, I was wondering if this could be an underrated after-millennial Hong Kong horror. It was barely a horror movie to begin with. In the prologue, we have Eason Chan's character Cho Pat, who was known to be loafing around backstage, to the ire of the senior members of the troupe. When he was tasked to retrieve a prop for his senior, he will be haunted by the prop moving on its own. Even with the best opportunity for a jump scare on our protagonist has slipped away, and we have Joey Young as the spirit of the deceased opera singer, persistently haunting the theatre and causing pesky possessions, including Pat himself, in order to force the hands of our lead character to help fulfill her wish. Pat, a kind-hearted delinquent who harbored some interest in the art of Chinese opera, and after a funny episode of the ghost of Zi Wanfei possessing Pat, causing inconvenience to his loved ones while softening his stance after hearing the sob story of Miss Zi, he agreed to assume her identity and advertise the performance in order to lure her lover out of recluse. While the platonic chemistry between Chang and Young helped to carry the movie, the plot was all over the places, with Chan's love interest, a rich man's daughter played by Yumiko Chang, who seems to be a gambling god who will shorten her life for every successful gamble on request of her recalcitrant father. The health of the opera troupe was also confusing to say the least, with the troupe leader missing in action, leaving his wife and young daughter holding the fort. It felt like interest in the traditional performance art was dwindling, which was apparent in the post-2000 world. Yet the opera troupe could appease Pat's request to put on the show on a whim. Of course, the leading man of the troupe was previously possessed by Zi, and perhaps everyone was on their toes. One memorable scene would be an old man coming out to claim that he was the reclusive lover, now aged and never forgotten about Zi. Upon hearing that the spirit of Zi had taken over the cast of Pat, the old man did not waste time but sexually assault poor Pat. The inside joke was the casting of this old man with an actor who had played some memorable evil characters in Jet Li and Stephen Chow movies, most famously as a eunuch. The movie was produced by Emperor Motion Pictures, and it felt like a vehicle to showcase their young movie stars and singers, the likes of Chan, Yong, Yumiko Chang, and Nicholas Zi, who had a hefty cameo role as the lover of Zi Wanfei. It was also an ode to the art of Cantonese opera, with the various characters doing their renditions of well-known opera tunes, which of course meant nothing to me. The likes of Anthony Wong and Christine Ng, who we had introduced in our channel before, played the abrasive leading man and the deserted wife of the leader of the troupe. The antagonism between Wong's character and Pat also reminded me of the issues festering from jealousy in differential treatment of actors in Hocus Pocus, leading to characters coming to blows. It was mainly crossing of verbal swords in this case. Kate Young, who would later be featured in the I-10, played the effervescent daughter of the troop leader who was eager to keep the opera troupe alive despite her parents' ultimate fates. Speaking of the troop leader, it was a jarring scene when he finally made his return, but it was blatant for the audience to know what had happened to him. The casting of the actor was supposed to celebrate the Chinese opera scene in Hong Kong, with the actor being a celebrated opera performer himself. Demi-Haunted was not the scary adventure that gave Ethan Chan nightmares during the filming. Maybe it did while shooting at the opera theatre setting. It was a dramatic comedy with supernatural elements which never meant to scare the audience, and supported by fans of those singers at their peak of their popularity. The movie was merely a 6 out of 10, with Chinese opera playing a massive role in the story. So we are back with Asian Trips feature, which I always have fun doing, catching up some horror offerings from various parts of Asia, and especially revisiting classic horror movies like we did in this episode. And if you have enjoyed this review as much as I did while making this, please help by clicking the like button and share it to your like-minded interest groups. As usual, if you are new to this channel and had a good time, please give me a subscription. I did another Triple Films review last week with Brian Fuller's Dust Bunny, Jake Meyer's Kombucha, and Luciano and Nicholas Onetti 1978. Go check it out if you have not. Chinese opera was a fad even in Singapore when I was growing up. People just got to remind each other not to occupy the front row seats. Those were not meant for the human beings.